video is sponsored by DistroKid. This here is the ultimate Elektron setup. And that's what I want to talk about today. And I also want to talk about my workflow with these boxes, why I picked them, why I think this in particular of all the Elektron boxes is the ultimate setup, how I have them routed, and how I go about writing some of the music as well. Let me give you some sound examples of what you can achieve with this setup. First thing I need to talk about is what boxes are these? What do these boxes do? Why did I pick them? And why are they placed where they're placed? And how do I have them routed? So let's get started. This right here is the Digitakt. This is kind of the centerpiece of the whole thing. Although it's not in the center like the Octatrack is, it truly is the centerpiece and where most of the writing happens. I use the Digitakt for all of my drum duties, vocal samples, which are really important to have in your music. People latch onto vocal sounds, so vocals and drums, but I also do some synthesis on here, either sampled synthesis or I use single cycle waveforms and take advantage of the multiple LFOs and filters to design some interesting and complex sounds right on the Digitakt, which I love to do. I love sound designing on the Digitakt. This thing sounds fantastic. The Digitakt also takes care of my sequencing duties of external gear. So the TB03, for instance, that's over here, that's being sequenced by the Digitakt. If I'm not using the Digitakt, I'm using the Octatrack for sequencing external gear because it has a great MIDI arpeggiator, which is something you're not going to find on most of the other Elektron boxes. Map from the future. Let me explain why I MIDI sequence from the Digitakt and not any of these other boxes. Although I did mention that I do MIDI sequence from the Octatrack from time to time, but for the most part it is always on the Digitakt. My main reason for that is really just because the MIDI tracks are exposed. I always have access to them, I don't have to search for them. If I go to the Digitone, I have to hit the MIDI button, and during a live performance, going in and out of the MIDI section can be really confusing with the mute section. And hitting the MIDI button is also your Control-All function for the Digitone, so it's just, I don't like doing it that way, so that one's out. This one I have to sacrifice a track, and I don't like the idea of sacrificing a track when I'm starting to write a track, so I usually ignore it for MIDI sequencing and just do it right on the Digitakt because it has 8 free tracks for MIDI sequencing, and it's right in front of me. No sacrifice has to be made. It functions in the same way that these do, except for it doesn't have the chord mode that comes with the Digitone. So it just works for me. The reason I don't do it on the Octatrack as much is just because I'm doing most of my writing in these boxes. So Digitakt takes care of a lot of heavy lifting in this setup. It's a really easy to use sampler. It's an 8-track monophonic sampler, but it has 8 tracks of MIDI too. If you're unfamiliar with sampling and you want to get into sampling, I highly recommend the Digitakt because it's very easy to use for sampling. It does slicing, repitching, time stretch. These are new features that have recently been added. But besides that, it's just a great sampler. Sounds great, great audio quality, great effects. Reverb and delay are beautiful in the Elektron ecosystem, particularly in these Square devices. As I may have mentioned, this video is sponsored by DistroKid. Today I want to point out one of their great features called Mixia. Mixia is a mastering service that DistroKid offers. It's really fast, like pretty much instantly. You can upload one of your tracks to Mixia right on DistroKid. They let you try it for free if you already have an account, and accounts with DistroKid are incredibly cheap. The best thing that I think a online mastering service can do for you is just get your music up to the right loudness level to compete with other artists' loudness. Just gonna get you to that right volume level so that your music seamlessly integrates with everyone else's. Next to the Digitakt, we have the Digitone. The Digitone is an 8-voice FM synthesizer that incorporates subtractive synthesis, meaning it has filters on its tracks. I think of the Digitone as a complex oscillator polyphonic synthesizer. So to me, the FM synthesis is just used to make some very harmonically rich waveforms, and then I'm using subtractive synthesis to carve away some of those frequencies to make what I consider pleasant sounds, and then I sequence them. It's also a multi-timbral instrument, so I can have different patches on 4 different tracks with different sequence lengths. So it's very powerful and it sounds great. It has reverb, delay, and chorus, all of which you can customize. All of these boxes also have stereo 1/4 inch balanced inputs for processing other pieces of gear, including themselves. I do chain these together, and we'll talk about that a little bit further. The Digitone takes care of all of my polyphonic needs, and if it can't handle the polyphonic needs that I need, if it needs like a analog synthesizer polyphonic chord, that's something that I will sample into the Digitakt. So a Prophet 5, for instance, or a Novation Peak, or whatever you have on your table. That's something I would sample into my Digitakt and use in one of my songs that way. So it covers a lot of territory. It does a ton, and it sounds fantastic. The learning curve on it's a little bit higher than some other synthesizers because it is FM synthesis, but they did a great job of putting a little bit of guardrails on it to make it easy for you to design sounds on. Over here, we have the Elektron Syntakt. This is the newest of all the boxes from Elektron. This is a digital analog hybrid box, and I consider it to be a jack of all trades and kind of a master of none. I guess what it's a master of is filling all the gaps for you, and that's what it does for me. So the Syntakt is in most of my songs, but it's covering different things in different songs. It's never my drum machine because I like my sampler to be my drum machine, has a built-in compressor. It just works really well for that. I can chop up breaks, anything I need. Digitakt's got that covered. The Syntakt does a great job of just covering any other auxiliary sound. So it can do chords with the Model Cycles chord engine that's built into it. It can do screaming leads with the raw synth or with the Swarm synthesizer. And then it can do really nice bass sounds with its analog tracks that it has, 4 of them. Not to mention it has an effects track with an analog overdrive and analog filter. And what's so important about that is that I have this Digitone routed into my Syntakt as well and routed through the effects track. So if I want to do sidechain pumping just within these 2 systems, I can do the sidechain pumping here. I can also do it here on the Octatrack, but I can do it here on the Syntakt. And that's something that's really powerful and an effect I like to use in my music. Ducking doesn't have to sound like some sort of crazy effect in your music. It can really just be to carve out a little bit of space so your kick cuts through. That's originally what I think it was for, but we kind of turned it into a musical effect that I do enjoy quite a bit and I use all the time. The Syntakt can do that. It does it very well. So does the Octatrack, but the Syntakt does it in a way that's really simple, as opposed to the Octatrack, which requires quite a bit of setup to get it running and sounding decent, and you have to use one of your filters. The Syntakt for me is a very powerful piece of kit and something I never want to sacrifice. I don't think I actually need any more than what I have here on the table, even though I did add the TB03, which I love because none of these boxes do acid as well as an acid box. They kind of do. You may have seen me turn my Octatrack into a 303, and it sounds pretty good, but it's not as good as a box with built-in distortion and delay and the waveforms that I need and the filter sound that I really like. Let me show you a little bit about how I use the Syntakt here. If I want to make a really fat sound, I'll use multiple tracks to make that sound. On this track right here, I'm using 2 analog engines on the Syntakt, 2 bass patches, slightly panned left, slightly panned right on each one so that they are really full, very wide. This is what that sounds like. That sidechain ducking is actually coming from the Octatrack. You'll hear it on each kick. Kind of using it as an effect, but I could have done it on the Syntakt, and I may actually switch over to the Syntakt, but that's neither here nor there. So something that's really powerful is I have that sidechain effect happening here. We have that ducking going on, but I have the Digitakt that's not being ducked. So if I want, I can now play a lead line over the sidechain. And that's a really nice sound, I think. So I like to take advantage of the sidechain being on this side and then using a couple leads on my Digitakt. I could do the sidechain ducking just inside the Syntakt, I can also do it inside the Octatrack, which will do it to both machines at the same time. You have to pick and choose what you want to do. The advantage of doing it on the Octatrack is that I can use it as a scene, so I can switch to sidechain pumping and leave sidechain pumping. That's not something you can do over here, other than muting and unmuting your effects track, which means that you may have to sacrifice using that analog distortion and other things you may have done in your effects track. So that brings us to the last box, the big guy here that's up on these little planks that are elevating it above my boxes. The reason it's there is so that these cables don't have to get pushed against the Octatrack. The Octatrack sits over the cables. I find it to be quite an advantage. And it's still flat, which is the way I like to work because it feels better on my hands. The Octatrack, stereo sampler, 8 tracks of MIDI, 8 tracks of audio, stereo resampling, crossfader, insert effects, send and return, stereo inserts, multiple inputs. This thing just does it all. It has a obscure and difficult workflow. It takes a long time to learn. I'm here to teach you if you're interested in lessons. There's links for that in the video description. It's a really powerful piece of kit. The reason why it's so powerful is because it can just be anything you need it to be. It can be your full production box if you want. It could be a DJ box playing track to track of other people's music for some sort of gig you might have. It can be a performance mixer using a template such as the one that I have built and I use for all of my shows. Something that I'm very excited to share with people is the templates that I designed for the Octatrack. You can find links to that in the video as well. So the Octatrack covers a lot of territory. It can do my filtering. It can do freeze delays. High-pass filters, or lo-fi, or tape stops. It does a lot. You can choose all your routing. Resampling on it is a really powerful feature as well. So without having a big DJ mixer, the Octatrack covers that. I don't need a special recording device that's set to a perfect quantized loop. That's what the Octatrack does for me. I have a track set up to record stereo 4-bar loops, so I can seamlessly move from moment to moment in my music, from track to track, or from sound to sound within a track. The Octatrack has that all covered. Matt from the future, let's talk about the Analog 4 and the Analog Rytm and why it's not on the table. Analog 4 and Analog Rytm are both amazing instruments. I own them both, I use them both, and I love them both. For me, those instruments are usually plugged into my computer, and I use them with Overbridge. Those aren't really boxes that I like to take out for live shows or even use to write that much content on them. For me, they're great devices to use with my DAW so that I have some analog synthesizers running into my computer that I can use in real time. Partly the reason why they're not here is their size. Their form factor is just very large. These boxes are a lot smaller. I can fit more stuff under the camera, which is important for me, but also it's just easy to pack these up and go. The other part is these boxes all have pattern mutes, which is a really important part of my personal workflow and how I write my songs. I do expect when I go to the next pattern that certain elements are not going to be muted and certain elements are going to be unmuted. That's just very important to me. Another piece of it is that this ecosystem, this square box ecosystem here, the DigiLine, they all work the same way. And I think that just helps me write music faster. I've just gotten used to working with these boxes. I do think those other ones are great. I do also, and don't hate me for this, I think that their workflow is a bit outdated compared to what you have in the newer Elektron boxes. Now let's talk about a little bit of workflow stuff. If you don't want to get stuck writing 4-bar loops, stop writing in 4 bars, write in 8-bar loops. What I do is all of my machines are set up at master 128 steps. That's 8 bars. So 128 steps here, 128 steps here, and 128 steps here. Some of these tracks within this song, those bass tracks, for instance, the one I shared with you, are at half speed. So they take up all 128 steps to achieve their full sequence. This way, the song doesn't get old as quick. It's not a constant repeat every 4 bars. I have moments in there at 6 bars or 7 bars that are slightly different from the first time around, whether it's a mild modulation or a complete note change or a complete sample change. That happens within an 8-bar loop. So that's something I highly recommend to writing better music. Write in 8 bars, don't write in 4 bars. So in terms of the workflow, 8-bar loops, 128 master length. Octatrack, for me, is my master clock. That has to do with some of the audio settings in the Octatrack. The Octatrack is less prone to glitches with resampling and different effects if it's the master clock. I'm using it for effects, so it makes sense for me to do it there. It sends program change, clock, and transport out to all these boxes with one MIDI out cable. I route that into here. I go through the MIDI through to the next one, to the input here, out the MIDI through, into the next one, and if I want, I can keep going with that chain. I'm using the Digitakt to sequence the TB-03, as I said, so it has its own MIDI cable, which is unaffected by the Octatrack. It's just getting clock from here, but all of its note sequencing happens from the Digitakt. For my personal songwriting, I usually start with some sort of unique sound or something I've been designing on the Digitone or Syntakt, and I go from there, adding the drums based on what's inspiring me by the sounds that I'm writing or something I've sampled in the studio. This is the ultimate Elektron setup, in my humble opinion. I think they're amazing. I think you'll think they're amazing too if you give them a shot. Honestly, I do. If you're interested in supporting this channel, please like this video, leave a kind comment, or don't leave a comment if you don't have something nice to say. Consider joining the Patreon if you'd like to support me on my efforts at making more videos like this, or get your hands on my performance template, which has 64 different effects, and I'm working on a couple new ones right now, such as one specifically built for techno, which will be coming out pretty soon. You can join the Discord. There's a lot of people in there. We have over 2,000 members, a lot of people talking about Elektron, modular, electronic music in general, just having a good time. It's a real safe community. I invite you to come and hang out with us. No prerequisite other than just being a part of. You just come and hang out. I'm Matthew, aka EZBOT. I'll see you next time.